Bueno, muy buenos días a todos, buen día, buenas tardes a quienes nos acompañan desde Europa. Voy a iniciar en español para dar la bienvenida a nuestros participantes y introducir esta sesión, y luego pasaré al inglés, ya que nuestra primera sesión del día va a ser en inglés. Empezamos entonces el día 2 de nuestra conferencia Digital Media LATAM 2021. Agradecerles a todos por acompañarnos nuevamente. Vamos a empezar agradeciendo nuevamente a los que apoyan esta conferencia, la Google News Initiative, el Facebook Journalism Project, Chartbeat, United Robots, Protec Media, Adops LATAM y nuestro media partner del Laboratorio de Periodismo de la Fundación Luca de Tena. Agradecerles nuevamente por su apoyo este año para lograr armar este programa, que esperemos sea de su agrado. Discúlpenme. Vamos igualmente a presentar muy brevemente lo que se viene el día de hoy. Vamos a empezar ahora y me meteré más en detalle en la primera sesión, que va a ser enfocada en la cultura del producto y un enfoque muy particular, que es el enfoque MACU, que va a presentar Louise Story, a quien vamos a brevemente presentar en un momento. También tendremos en sesión 2 una conversación patrocinada por el Facebook Journalism Project sobre las distintas iniciativas que lleva adelante el Facebook Journalism Project en América Latina, trabajando con muy distintas organizaciones y medios para impulsar el valor a través de la transformación digital. Luego pasaremos también en línea, digamos, con la temática de hoy, que está muy enfocada en temas de producto. Vamos a conversar con Luciana Cardoso y Adam Pasic de Quartz y el New York Times sobre cómo se puede producir una newsletter como un producto irresistible para las audiencias. Y luego terminaremos con lo que muchos están esperando, que es el anuncio de los ganadores de nuestros premios Digital Media LATAM, a la 1 de México y 3 de Buenos Aires y de Sao Paulo. Pero bueno, vamos a enfocarnos en lo que viene en este preciso momento, que es la sesión número 1. Como les decía, este día va a estar muy enfocado en temas ligados al producto, y vamos a iniciar justo una sesión sobre este tema. Les recuerdo que tenemos traducción simultánea. Elijan el idioma de su preferencia en la barra de herramientas que deben tener a un costado, en la parte inferior o superior o lateral de su pantalla. Ahí tienen un globo terráqueo que pueden elegir para seleccionar el idioma de su preferencia. Y también comentarles que después de la conversación, de la presentación y conversación que tendremos, vamos a también tener una sesión de preguntas y respuestas, así que pueden ir dejando sus preguntas en la sección de Q&A, que también aparece en esa barra de herramientas, para que justo después las participantes puedan responder a sus inquietudes, a sus preguntas. Así que vamos a empezar entonces con esta primera sesión. Voy a presentar a quien será la moderadora de la sesión, que es Maëlys Chevalier, a quien agradecemos nuevamente estar con nosotros en una edición de evento de WAN-IFRA para la región de América Latina, España y Portugal. Felices de estar contigo, Maëlys, nuevamente. Maëlys es directora de Innovación y Producto en Vocento, en España. En este rol ella trabaja para reforzar la evolución de los productos digitales del grupo, reforzar el contacto con los socios tecnológicos internacionales de la industria que tiene el grupo, para siempre tratar de innovar con todas las exigencias y demandas del mercado, que como sabemos son cada vez más cambiantes. Trabaja también en ese rol apoyando al equipo directivo en el análisis transversal e integral de los productos que produce el grupo Vocento, estudiando las tendencias de los mercados, de los medios editoriales online y en general de la gestión también del Media Lab de Vocento. Es licenciada en Economía Internacional, tiene un máster en Negocios Digitales y también, además de trabajar en Vocento, ha trabajado en varias empresas, entre ellas Procter & Gamble y Axel Springer. Maëlys, un gusto tenerte, bienvenida, and the floor is yours. Pasamos ahora al inglés.
The pleasure is mine, Rodrigo. Thank you very much. So having to present Louise is a real pleasure. And somehow Louise has her DNA already embedded in her last name, Story. Indeed, she's a journalist with a passion to great storytelling and incisive reporting that impacts the world. She's a media leader with a track record of helping news companies transform and grow, like, for example, nothing more than Wall Street Journal and New York Times. Louise has worn many hats in the media, taking on projects that she feels she will move the needle in helping the world have more journalism that matters. And just let me quote some of her hats: investigative reporter, masthead editor, technologist, filmmaker, manager of large reporting and video projects, media and audience strategist, radio production, design thinker, product leader, head of innovation project, builder of large teams, and senior editor with responsibility for a large daily news report. And most recently, Louise was the chief news strategist and chief product and technology officer at the Wall Street Journal. That job included scope across the full Wall Street Journal with a significant operational and strategic mandate. In the newsroom, Louise was one of the top 5 news editors, and she oversaw the news strategy as well as its digital transformation. And for the full Wall Street Journal, which means content and commercial, Louise oversaw the product engineering, design, and product management teams. So just let me quote her editor-in-chief when she left Wall Street Journal just very recently this summer in a very good, I would say, understanding. Louise, and he said, Louise played a central role in advancing our digital transformation and broadening the reach and impact of our journalism. She has brought in new skills, capabilities, and ways of thinking that have elevated our journalism and greatly improved our product, technology, and data experiences for our members. Her work has helped guide our coverage and accelerate our growth in audiences and subscribers over the past 3 years. So Louise, I guess he must be missing you right now very much. But prior to this role, Louise spent also more than a decade at the New York Times. During that span, she helped lead multimedia and strategy initiatives and worked on groundbreaking projects as an investigative reporter that led to multi-billion-dollar plus financial settlements, government reforms, and legal conviction. What an impressive career path, Louise. So looking so much forward to listening to your presentation, and then let's have a talk afterwards.
Thank you so much. So I'm glad to be here with you all. I will share my screen and get going. And I look forward to also taking all of your questions later. Okay, so you may have wondered when you saw the title of this presentation, what am I talking about with the MACU? We're going to talk about that today, and I hope it's a phrase and a term that you all will take throughout your work in media companies around the world. Focusing on the MACU, it's one of my favorite things to do. To start, though, I want to remind you of the mentality that has long existed in news. There's a feeling that if you write it, they will come. You know, that because you find out something's happening or an editor says that's a big story and you put it out there, that of course people will want to read it. In fact, they need to know it because this editor has said it's important. Well, guess what? It's not true. And so we've all realized that in the digital transformation, and as people can see the number of page views and how long people stay or don't stay in their articles, we've all realized that if you write it, they might not come. And so we'll talk about why that means media companies, newsrooms, and all parts of a media company have to work together to change the way that they create the product of a news company, which is the content and the news experience together. That is the product of a news company. So to continue, this is the MACU. I'll give you a brief intro on it and we'll come back to it. But the MACU is all the same thing, but in different parts of media companies, people are using different words. So membership, you know, where they may be selling subscriptions, for example, they talk about members. And in the newsroom, people talk about audiences, you know, and audience development. That's very much a newsroom term. Whereas in subscription sales or membership, they're talking about marketing, right? So they talk about members, and newsroom talk about audiences. Customer service, they talk about customers. And then in product design and engineering, they're talking about users. But these are all the same people. And this is one of the things that really struck me when I joined the Wall Street Journal a little over 3 years ago, is people were talking about the audience or the readers, but they weren't necessarily talking together, and they were calling them different things. And these languages were a little bit of a barrier. So we'll come back to the idea, but that's what the MACU is. It's this concept of all these different terms for the people out there that we all need to be focusing on. So just one example about why all these groups within a news company need to talk together. Here's something that I was really proud that we did for the 2020 presidential election in the US. On the right, you see a Twitter screen. So what's happening here is literally as the vote was being called in states in the US, instantaneously and automatically on Twitter, the Wall Street Journal's tweets were showing the race calls. So how could this happen? You know, you have to get the data from the Associated Press. It has to come to the Wall Street Journal. The reporters and editors have to look and make sure it makes sense. They have to be putting the stories out. They have to be making the graphics, and they have to put it on social media. So how would that happen instantaneously? And the reason is because we built it as a technology product that worked along the ways that our news coverage needed to work. And it was really, it brought us a lot of traffic, a lot of traction in social media. It's something that we didn't have the capacities to do before in the prior election. So what's going on here is it's journalism, but it's also software, right? And it's news, and it's also product, and it's content, and it's tools. All these things are working together to be able to give this sort of automated information experience in a big news event. And so what we're seeing is that technology and news are merging. So they're merging, and we all need to focus on the same things together. And that's a lot of the work I've done, and excited to talk more with you now, is how within a company with lots of different people, lots of different disciplines, different cultures, there's a different technology culture than a news culture. How can you work together? Okay, one answer is the MACU. So when I joined the Journal, and as we started designing new teams and ways of working, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, I realized that we really had internal goals as well as external goals that we needed to accomplish. And we did, and it was very helpful in our work. The external goals were, we needed to be adjusting our content and our product to be of value and to lead to high engagement to our audiences. But the internal goal was we had to change the work and the way we worked. We had to work differently. We could not work in silos. So one of the reasons that I came up with this MACU phrase is because I realized we shouldn't force everyone to call them members, or we shouldn't say, no, we all need to call them audiences. There is value in these different disciplines. There's great value in what someone in membership does, who's worked in marketing and who has worked on the audience customer funnel. And there's great value in engineering and design thinking and in news thinking. And so what this is supposed to signify is we respect the different languages. We respect the different disciplines. And this phrase says, but in respecting them, we recognize the commonalities we have so we can work together. And that's the MACU. One area that we put a lot of focus on that I would encourage you to think about within your own organization is how do you work through what ideas you do? And so we spent a lot of time also focusing on, for example, if we were going to build or change things in our products, how can we be inclusive of all ideas, but have a clear, transparent process by which ideas are selected? And so this is the process that we ran. It was a review process, fully transparent. Anyone could come to the meetings where we brought in ideas very actively from all corners of the company to be able to figure out, and then every idea we looked at in a framework around how would this affect the MACU and affect our goals and what we're trying to do with them. Another thing that was really important to us was, and I think should be important to you with whatever you're doing in your organization, is culture and how do you work. And so one of the things that I like to encourage media companies to do is say, okay, here's a traditional culture, where are we trying to get to? And then to state it to your team. So here's an example of something some of these are ones you could take away. Share with your teams. Okay, so right now, are there multiple KPIs across teams? Okay, if so, let's make it a goal to get to aligned goals and shared KPIs. Are there different data sets? Are things being calculated differently in different parts of your company? Well, let's get those calculated the same way everywhere. And this is not the kind of thing that you just want to talk with other leaders in your company about. You actually want to try to put where you are, honestly, and where you want to get to up on a slide and show it to everyone involved in the process, because it really will take all of your teams from top to even entry-level positions working together to see that, okay, this is how we do it now, but we want to go to this other way of working. Then the last thing I'm going to show before, we'll go in, we'll have a question with Melis, and then we'll have your questions later, is just a lot of people ask me about different structures, and here's a structure. It's been shared publicly that the Wall Street Journal created, that I led there, and thinking about how do you have cross-discipline teams. And so this structure was created with an eye on a user-focused, a MACU-focused content product development process, and the teams are set up that way. I'll talk you through in a second, rather than a discipline-based teams. So product design and engineering, these rows at the bottom, they're embedded throughout these 5 pillars, as are different functions like there's reporters and editors and some different functions you'll see as we go. So essentially, anything you're going to do, you need to look at insights, you need to look at user research, you need to look at data science. And so that team is the first step in the process to doing something new. And then, you need to innovate and test it out and try it out. And so this innovation team would do like quick prototypes. We run tests, see if they're working before building something much more into our platforms. And then if it's working, you need to be also thinking about the tool and how it will be scalable and used around your organization, and how it will be used in the case of content, in your storytelling. Then this next team, audience touchpoints, those are all the platforms, and you have to think very carefully through, the ads, where they're going to load on each place. That was the whole ad product, the mobile, how it works in mobile and web. Subscriber journey is like, at what point will someone see this? Do they need to be a subscriber? Are they just a registered member? Are they going to get a prompt for a newsletter while they're in here? How are we thinking about the subscriber's relationship to us in every new thing that we're building? And then audience groups and communities was like, okay, so we're making a new thing. How do we make sure we're including a feedback loop from the audience around this? How can they give us feedback on it? How can they give the reporters feedback or the tech team feedback? And how can we also build community around these things? And then programming strategy, that's a team that's, would look at ongoing stories and bring a data-driven product eye into, okay, here's how we'll tell this story, and here's how it fits with our whole product experience. And so this team was embedded throughout the newsroom to do that. So that's it on my presentation, and excited to talk more in depth.
Thank you so much, Louise. What an impressive presentation, and I guess also a lot of inspiration for most of us who are or at the beginning of the journey or in the middle of the journey. But going back to this, I would say, structure of the 5 main teams, and looking back at your first day when you arrived in Wall Street Journal, how was the process to set up this quite demanding and very mature organization structure? How did you do it?
Sure. So the first thing, when I arrived at the Wall Street Journal, I actually came to the Wall Street Journal first as the editor of the news strategy first. And I was there 6 months before I took also on the Chief Product and Technology Officer role. So when I first came, I was looking at, what are our big stories of the year? What are the big stories of the week? Should we add this beat or not? Is there audience interest in this beat? But very quickly I started seeing, okay, but we need to change our CFS. It doesn't have the right tools to be able to tell the stories that we need to do. And okay, we need this new, and things that you would need to work very closely with product and technology on. There was an excellent Chief Product and Technology Officer at that time who I worked very well with. And so what we first did before even talking about org structure was we started talking about, well, how are choices even prioritized here in terms of if we're going to put people on doing something. So the first thing we did, and I did this in partnership with the CPTO who was prior to me, was to overhaul the prioritization process and make it transparent. And one of the reasons it had not been transparent before necessarily was essentially the product and technology teams they were kind of carved up. They were doing a little bit of work for news, a little bit of work for opinion, a little bit of work for marketing and membership, and a little bit of work for advertising. But no one was all that happy because the teams weren't big enough to get very much done when you split them up that way. And so what I worked with that Chief Product Technology Officer on doing, and we worked then with the head of each of those units on doing, was if we can have a shared understanding of what our goals and what we're accomplishing with anything we build, we could jointly agree we're doing these 5 things this quarter, for example, and none of them are like really just for advertising or just for news or just for membership because, for example, if we're all going for a bigger audience, well, that's the goal of news and membership, but then also advertising a bigger audience, then they have more ads. So, if we can agree on what the goal is, it will benefit everyone. And so by overhauling that process with shared goals and how things were prioritized, that came ahead of any structural change. And then it was a few months later when the CPTO was promoted to the parent company, and then I took on that role, that we also started saying, okay, well, the teams are just kind of split up arbitrarily. What's the ideal way for people to work?
And those teams, they were reporting to a special person, or they were like transversal team having their actually working within each of those units, but then having their reporting lines on the other side. And were those teams physically together? For example, the news inside, the content experience, or audience touch points, they were like working together, or they were dispatched? How to imagine this very concretely?
Well, at first, when I arrived, they were all separate and they weren't necessarily working together, but that's what we brought together. Mm-hmm. Once I also took on the CPTO role, and then they were working extremely closely together. And it was very helpful because people in the teams started seeing how choices they would make had a big impact on another, what they thought was something removed from them, ability to do something. And so people even started just changing what they were doing because they realized, oh, it's going to need to work this team for this party, because they had more visibility into what people who were one step removed from them needed, which they hadn't had as much visibility into before.
Yeah, okay.
So they started working very, very closely together. Of course, when the pandemic hit, no one was sitting together anymore. But, we developed a really excellent culture. And actually, I would say, the first year of the pandemic, while it was extremely difficult for people for many reasons, family and health and so on, was a very productive and exciting time in our work because the teams were working together very well. The structure was very clear because we had built a culture so based on transparency of everything we were doing and why. I mean, with shared drives and regular workflows on how things worked, that actually worked really well in the remote world because it didn't rely on, you know, without clear processes like that and transparency, people kind of have to go around and ask someone, hey, what about this? That would be hard in the remote world. But because we were so set up that it was just so clear where to go to check on anything, we transitioned very well remotely. And the teams, you know, even though not in person, through Slack rooms, mostly, you know, that's how, you know, we'd work really closely together, even remote.
Okay. And then I'm just thinking of the media industry now, because when you talk about product, shifting to product and user-centric organizations, this is something that has already happened in many other industries, but it seems to take long in the media industry, and also not without friction between departments, no? And I even heard a senior consultant talking about civil war between products and editorial, for example. On the other side, as product somehow is rather highlighting the value of the content journalists are producing by including in the equation the user and experience, why are they so skeptical to put the user in the center of all the processes? How to earn the trust of the editorial team to reach this level of collaboration you were mentioning before?
Well, I mean, there's different tactics. I mean, one thing that I set up that was very positive, and the New York Times has had some similar things to this that I remember from when I was there. So a lot of places do this, but I think it's very positive is, you know, weekly share sessions where you have reporters talk through, you pick a story that did really well with the audience for whatever reason. And then you come in and you dissect, it worked well here, worked well there, did not. And then you usually come up with this could have been better. And then you talk about it, and they talk about not only how they got the story, but also the audience reaction they've gotten and how that's helping them think about next stories. And then in the same meeting, you know, you dedicate the other half to talk about an optimization test you're running around different, you know, email newsletter promotions, or you talk about, you know, what you're doing in the mobile architecture. You talk about, like, you know, very different part of the work, and all the people listen and hear about how they're approaching their work. And I think it sends reporters back into their job being reminded that they are doing this as part of a company that's trying to think about, you know, bringing value to the readers and listening to the readers when they hear also that happening in other areas of the work. And I just think that's a good reminder. The other thing that you can do that's really helpful is make it easy for reporters and editors to hear from the audience, you know? So for example, and to hear from broad groups of the audience. So, I mean, of course you can put their emails on the bottom of every story. That's good. But they're going to hear from a subset there. Often, actually, sometimes it'll be a lot of complaints, but that's okay. They'll hear that. But there's other ways to, you know, we did a big project on making sure there was a welcoming environment in our comments area for discussion. Create a comments area with rules, tools, and incentives for people to have, you know, discourse that is civil and interesting. Create forms. We created forms that are very frequently used where you ask the audience, I'm reporting on such and such. I'm looking for someone who does such and such. Write in if you have a story. So then suddenly a reporter is getting all these leads from the audience. You know, create community groups on LinkedIn and invite reporters to talk with them. So, you know, I don't think it's really a war. I think it's just that sometimes, and I can tell you this because, you know, I've spent so much of my career as a reporter, like sometimes you're just so buried in reporting a story, and it's so hard sometimes to get that story, and you're facing pushback from your sources, and it's stressful that, like, you know, you could feel like you don't even have time to deal with, like, oh, the audience, whatever. But if within your company, people in the product unit and people around the company, customer service, if they're creating internal tools, if your bosses are carving out time for you to go talk to LinkedIn groups, if people are supporting reporters and editors and hearing and connecting with the community of readers in fruitful ways, most of them will do it and will will really enjoy it. So I just think it's about giving them the time and space and support and to listen to the audience.
Okay, and perhaps a bit provocative, but perhaps not as either. Does focusing and listening to the user or your audience obviously or necessarily means that you lose your editorial power, your editorial line?
So I think it depends how you view the role of an editor. So there's many different aspects of an editor's job, right? They select great talent to work in the newsroom, right? They, at the beginning of a story, approve whether a story would happen. They approve beats, you know, and then they edit the copy. And then they decide how prominently to place the story, right? So I think it depends on what part of that process exactly you're focusing on. But you're right, a lot of editors think of themselves a little bit like tastemakers, like it's important because they think it's important. And I think that the modern editor-in-chief should be using their news judgment to make sure they're being fair in stories, to ask good questions and push their reporters to ask interesting, tough questions. But whether or not the story is noteworthy should come from their knowledge, but also should come from their constant looking at data on what are readers looking for, and their decisions on what format should the story be in and how should we tell this should be informed by looking at, like, well, are people on this topic reading a really long story, or they prefer. So I think the job of the editor is to become, you know, the best expert on both the journalism they're doing and the leader of great reporting teams, but also the best expert on their audience and understanding what they're looking for and being nimble. And as the audience changes what it wants, you help change what you do. So that is a different way than many editors have approached their jobs, but they need to be willing to give up a little bit of their own tastemaking to be a bridge and a liaison between the newsroom and the audience, and to really pride themselves in helping give reporters, for example, the time, the tools, the support, and themselves connecting and understanding how their work is received by the broader world.
Sounds great. I would love to have this in all publishing group, I guess. But exactly talking about this willingness of the editor, thinking perhaps of some media companies where the print legacy is very strong, where actually gut feeling decisions are more important than user-centric decision. But on the other side, where there is this will to change and transform, where to start, where to unblock the situation. I don't know if you have like one, and also regarding this, the role of the top management also within the company in all this transformation process. Then I'm more thinking of all those media groups that are more at the beginning of this journey.
Well, the number one most important thing is to make sure that the leadership at the top of the media company is in agreement on what they're trying to achieve and how they're measuring it. So are you trying to reach more people per month in unique visitors? Are you trying to convert more subscribers? Are you trying to decrease churn? Are you trying to increase how many days per month people come to visit you? And do all those things point in the same direction? And a lot of media companies have leaders who are actually pushing at different goals. So first, the place to start is to align the top goals at the top. The next thing to do then is to be completely open and transparent with the entire company on what those goals are and why. And then the third place to go after you've done that is to say to the teams, we trust you to iterate to some degree to get us towards these goals. And we're going to judge, and this is not like you're in trouble if it doesn't work, because actually when things don't work, you learn, that's good. But we are going to evaluate how things we try work, whether they work or not, whether they're driving to these goals. And by being very open in what the goals are, you can move more quickly as a media company because people on the front lines know what you're trying to get at. And remember, there's a lot that goes into what I just said, because if when you share the goals, then you need to make sure you're providing at least weekly, maybe daily, reports and feedback to people so they understand if what they did is driving towards the goals or not. So you really need to build some very smart data distribution, dashboards, reports, where again, the numbers they're getting are numbers that will add up to the goals. So you have to think through at every level, how can people get this feedback? But if you don't do that, if you don't tell teams what you're trying to get to, if you don't agree at the top what you're trying to get to, and you don't tell people, then anytime someone new in your team, wherever they are in the company, be it in membership or be it in the newsroom, anytime they want to try something, they won't know if it's okay or going to work, and they'll have to run it up to the flagpole to the top, and there's a bottleneck. And then we don't, guess what, like we don't have time for that as an industry. So we need to find a way to scale and distribute iteration and testing and some forms of experimentation within things you're comfortable in, driving towards the goals. And the only way to do that is through transparency and distribution of information.
Somehow it's like bringing agile philosophy within a media group. Okay. I'll go to some questions. I have two questions from Mariano and from Maricella or Maricela. So, Mariano was going back to your structure with the main teams, you know, and then the cross team. And just quoting him, I do not understand very well the decision-making process in this transversal structure. If you can clarify. So I guess it goes back to reporting responsibility and how the communication goes exactly through this organization you were presenting.
Sure. So basically, in the point, there's a couple points into the org where things can just be, there's a few points where things can just be tried, which I think, you know, is very important. People can just try some things without a lot of top level sign off, because again, that very much bottlenecks things. But you want to make sure, and you want to hold the teams accountable when they come show you what they tried eventually later on, that the way they are deciding what to do is based on, will this drive to our goals? So we built, you know, you can make frameworks where that you provide to everyone and how to think about, do I try this or that? So for example, it's good to have, you know, some sort of, you know, quick prototyping team that can try things in a nimble way without you having to tear up the roadmaps of all of your platform teams. That is easier said than done. So if you want to be in that kind of culture, then you have to make some of their changes. So for example, you would need to then create essentially an inner source setup for your engineering teams, right? So this is something that, you know, I've really helped people kind of go to more an inner source model. Like, you need it to be the case that people in experimental teams can commit code to your platforms, right? So you'd have to organize your teams to understand where they have clear documentation, that code can come in, and you know that, you know, you can do that. You can make other teams can make pull requests. But so basically you have a few teams where they can try things as long as they're in the framework. But once you get into things that are going to be like hitting a lot of roadmaps, those are all tied to the quarterly prioritization. We like it in the quarterly prioritization. You like it when there's been some experimentation and there's been some research and user research and data before it's even presented as something to a review process to see if it gets a big resource, right? And so what you want to do is you want to teach your teams what is expected to come to the table before a quarterly review when the options are basically considered by the top of the company. Should we make a big bet on this or that? And so you need to have already been testing. So usually for a quarter before you're putting something big up, you're looking at the data, you're looking at the research. And then, ultimately, the decisions, are very informed by and the solutions that are being proposed by the team, but the decisions that we're going to put a lot of resources behind something do go to the top. But, what I've seen, in the industry is when it doesn't start at the top and end at the top, this starts often with the top says, here's some goals. The whole org comes back and says, well, here's some possible solutions. And now we're testing them and these seem to work. And then the top says, okay, do these. That's like a conversation throughout your organization, top to bottom, that's very different than just the top saying, here's the goal and here's how you're going to do it and go do it now. You have to say, here's the goal, the teams try things, they come up with solutions, they show you some evidence, and then we go back and check in with the top. And you'll get better solutions that way. And by the way, a happier team that feels included in the process, which is really important.
Right, I truly believe in this as well. And so you were mentioning the importance of sharing a goals and having a common purpose. Does it mean that you were like implementing methodology like OKR or objective and key results, which is very typical from the technology world? Is it something that you were using also to I would say, start from the goal and then display it in different type of goals so that you can reach this common purpose?
Yes, so there are different, I've seen that used a few different ways, but the most important thing is that the product managers have to present OKRs that actually will ladder to your top level company goals. So I'm sure you all have seen this as well, but if all you ask your team members for is show me a number go up, they can find some number that they can get to go up. And that's how a lot of people approach OKRs, is they're like, I'm going to increase this by X to Y. But I always push people to say, well, to what end? If you do increase that from X to Y, if for example, your company's goals reach, like, will that help in reach? Will that help you? If it's, let's just say hypothetically, your company's goal is, we want more people coming to our platforms every month. There's a lot of OKRs and things people could do that wouldn't affect that at all. So you have to really push back and say, well, that's fine, but how does that lead to more people coming per month? And just send them back until they come up with a lower level result in what they're doing that would lead to it. Or then you got to question, maybe we shouldn't be doing what you're doing.
Yeah. So you were the greatest facilitator within the Wall Street Journal, I guess.
Well, I mean, I'm a big believer, in data, and a very strong data science team where you really around the whole company calculate things the same way goes a long way. And then sharing the same information with everyone goes a long way.
Of course. So let me take another question, because I was mentioning Maricela, and the question is, in what way have the criteria for segmenting the audience in the Wall Street Journal changed? We should know before how they were at the beginning and how they changed. The segmentation of the audience.
So, and I can't speak for the Wall Street Journal now since I've left, but, as has been, publicly discussed different places, there's different ways to segment an audience, right? There's subscribers, there's non-subscribers, there's, you can segment people by age and demographic. One thing that, we've discussed publicly in the past in their presentations that the journal has done, and which I have seen a lot of people in the industry talking about. In fact, there was a big report from INMO last week about this, which is light readers versus heavy readers. So this is something that, increasingly people in the industry are looking at. And so I'll just explain this a little bit more because it's something that I think you all could take away. If you just look at data in your organization, you say, what are our subscribers reading versus what are our non-subscribers reading? A very typical thing a lot of media companies do. Then you say, okay, so we want to do more of what our subscribers are reading because our subscribers are reading it. Well, here's the problem. Your subscriber page views, the number of page views of your subscribers, are going to be way heavily affected, very heavily affected by your very, very engaged and happy subscribers who come all the time. They're probably, I mean, it'll be different in all your data, but I bet you, go look at it, 80% of your page views of your subscribers probably come from like, you know, half your subscribers. Then you have this other, right. Then you have this other half of subscribers and they only give you 20% of your page views. So here's the problem. Which half? The happy subscribers or the less engaged subscribers? Who's going to churn? The people who are going to churn are going to be the ones who aren't coming that much. So actually, it can be very effective for you to isolate out what those paying subscribers are reading and do more of that. So those are your light readers. They are paying subscribers, but they're paying subscribers who are not very engaged. And if you focus on doing more of what they're interested in, it can have a very good effect of reducing churn. And it can have a very good effect. Actually, it correlates with what people who might join are interested in. And I also, you know, in general, in looking at, you know, and talking to a lot of people around the industry, in general, I will tell you, it's not really an either or between the people who are really engaged and less engaged. The people who are really engaged, they're not going to say, I don't like this website anymore because they're just doing more of this other stuff. Because it turns out the heavily engaged people, they just read so much that if you stop doing one thing that they read because you're doing more of something that the lighter engaged people read, they're not going to even, you know, like they read so much and they also go around and just click open a ton of stuff. So if you look at the time that those engaged people spend on stories, typically they actually spend more time on the stories that also do well with your less engaged people. Mm-hmm. They just open a ton of stuff. So your less engaged people are a leading indicator for all of your audiences. And so that's, I think, a good way to look at audience groups as opposed to men and women or different buckets. And also as opposed to subscriber versus non-subscribers, because you have subscribers who are reading very differently from each other.
And also the only registered, the one who are logged in or not logged in, no? Yeah.
That's another group. Yeah, that's another group as well.
And looking back at your amazing, I would say, transforming path, or within the New York Times, within the Wall Street Journal, is there something, looking back at this, you would do differently?
Yes, of course, I'm sure many things, but I'm just trying to think of, you know, a top thing. I mean,
you can make also the top three, no? If you
top
have some.
three. You know, I really think different organizations in the media are more or less comfortable. I've talked a lot about transparency inside of your organization, but I also think it's really important to be transparent with the outside. Uh-huh. And so, you know, that's something I would just encourage anyone, you know, who is trying to make changes in a media company to think about all along that you really want to just be very open with readers and the public about what you're doing and why, and ask for feedback. That can sometimes be forgotten. You know, it's very interesting how you undertake a transformation with the goal of doing better for the audience, but then you get so busy in the inside. People can get very busy on the inside and very busy moving org charts around and very busy doing all these things that, like, they forget to include the MACU. So just don't forget that you want to have everyone at the table, which is everyone inside, but also find ways throughout the process that you're getting feedback, be it through data, which is just implicitly how are they liking it, but you need to regularly be looking at, or also via like through asking them, hey, we're trying this new thing. What do you think? And I think that allows a company to actually try bolder things because you know you're being honest with the public that you're trying something, you want some feedback. And it's very common with technology companies. You see all the time, beta, give us feedback, but it's very rare that you see a media company who just owns it, who says, we're trying some new things, we're changing, we want to know what you think, have some patience with us, give us your feedback. And I think more companies could take that attitude.
Yeah, that's a good point. And even if your position is very unique, no? Within even the media world, not only within Wall Street Journal, what are the abilities that are especially important to work in such a transversal position? Thinking perhaps of the audience, or perhaps some of the people listening to us would love to develop or a product department or product function or growing within this function. So what are the abilities that are key, and what would you recommend?
You mean in terms of skill sets, like skills?
Yeah, skill sets. Right, right, skill sets, yes.
Okay, there's a few that I think are really essential. I mean, first of all, people need to be very comfortable with data. People need to be numerate. People cannot be afraid of spreadsheets, cannot be afraid of data. And, you can support people in becoming more comfortable with data, but it's just very difficult to have the kind of conversations you need to have about changes you need to make and thinking about trying different things if you have someone at the table who isn't regularly looking at the data, who doesn't know the same things everyone else knows about the data, who doesn't. So that's just a capacity that, I think it used to be in news orgs, maybe it was just the business reporters in the newsroom who had to be more numerate, but everyone needs to become more comfortable with numbers and data. So that's one thing. From a leadership and management standpoint, and this is something, there's managers of all levels who can focus on this, beyond listening to your audiences, which we all need to do, it's really important to just focus on listening a lot to your team members. And this, I know this sounds obvious, but this is not the traditional newsroom culture. The traditional newsroom culture is very top down. Here's what we're doing, go do it. And, with the changes we need to make, as well as there's a generational change, there's a different expectation of younger workers today that they don't want to just be put in a box. They want to be included. They want to be respected for their views on various things. You don't have to do everything everyone says, but you need to listen. And so for media companies to really take some time, leadership of all level, and think about how are we listening? How do we conduct meetings? How do we leave the time and space to be inclusive of points of view and listen is essential. And it will lead to better work and a lot better work. So that's another thing. Making choices, a lot of places are trying to do too many things at once. And I think that also comes from not having the shared goals. So like getting your shared goals and then just saying, these are the few things we're going to do. And we're saying no to all these other things because this is what we're going to do. And we're going to do this well for this quarter or the next 2 quarters or whatever your timeline is, is another important thing. So, I mean, those would be the main things. The data one's a big one. You're seeing a lot of people in media companies throughout all the different divisions too, taking on new skills. And I think that's really great to support your team members in training, taking on new skills. And then also to remember when you're talking to team members, because people are doing a lot of different things in their careers now, don't just ask them what they're doing right now in their job. Make sure you take time with people to learn about what they did in their last few jobs, because a lot of times, increasingly, you're going to have people on your teams who have real expertise and strength in something that's not in their JD right now. And so just take time to really understand more holistically, what people know about how they can be helpful and to draw that out.
Okay, sounds great. We just had another question, meanwhile, from Didier Pinto. Just reading it. What is the main strategy you recommend that traditional media in the process of transformation should implement to attract young audiences, perhaps under 30 years, of age in the face of the disorderly advance of social networks? That's a great challenge for our companies. That's really true.
That's a great challenge. I think the best thing to do for any age, but you can do this for the younger age, is to find something the people in the target group you're trying to attract really need. So, you know, for example, a number of publications in the US, including the Wall Street Journal, but a number of publications have college subscription programs. I don't know if you all have these, where, you know, the universities where you are, you know, maybe they pay a discount rate or a bulk rate or something, and they give subscriptions to the college students. So don't just make that about, oh, we're trying to hook them on to what we do. I want them to like start liking what we do young. You've got to think like, well, what do they need right now? What do they value right now? Like, what's going to be helpful to them right now? And by the way, like, go ask them. And what I've heard, for example, in that example, having asked people and then responding to it and seeing it working are two things. Now, this may not be the same with your college students, but I'm just giving this as an example because I've done a lot of work on the college space. Two things. First of all, they want help getting a job. Okay, so take that to heart. Like, okay, so what you want them to read your stuff. What are you doing to help them get jobs? And that can be articles, but it can also even be like virtual career coaching. It could be, there could be so many things. Like, take it to heart, like what they want to help getting a job. So that's thing number one. Thing number two that really resonates also is they want their views and their voices to be heard. And I've seen very strong success in programs where you will create communities of young people and you welcome them to write, and you run some and you pay them, and then those become some of the most shared by the others, you know, voices from other people who are actually in their situation. So, you know, again, that's the opposite of just trying to spoon feed them what you already do. So that's my advice is like, you pick your group, you create a community of them, you listen to them, and you try things. You see if they're, for example, if you have a newsletter you get them signed up to, you see what they're opening more of, you try it more, you ask them, and take it to heart. If they want help finding a job, then help them finding a job, you know. So, but that's, you know, that's different. And that's what you have to do in all of your org with your audiences. Is like, what is the user need? What do they really want? And it's just too bad if that's not what, you know, as long as it's not unethical, you don't want to say unethical, but as long as it's within the areas you cover, it's too bad if that's not what you thought you wanted to cover. Like, try doing it. And it can be very rewarding when people actually need it and you do something that helps them. So that's how I would approach that audience, is trying to understand what they really need and writing it.
Time is running, unfortunately. So let's close with the Louise of the future. We've been talking a lot about the Louise of the past, even if your past is actually very recent now, because it was July when you left the Wall Street Journal. But I have the feeling you haven't really left the world of finances now through your book and your consultancy activities. Perhaps you might tell us how you see your future. Will you be staying in the media industry, or perhaps try something else? Because these abilities can be actually implemented in whatever other sectors. And then we will have, unfortunately, to close afterwards.
Thank you. That's so nice. I'm really enjoying the things I'm doing right now. I'm writing a book. It's called The Black Dollar. It's about a history of race and money throughout American history. I'm working with a woman named Ebony Reed on that. And if you're curious to learn more on that, if you just Google Louise Story and The Black Dollar, I have a Substack and you could sign up, and we're keeping people update. I am also, as you mentioned, right now, just for the fall, providing some senior editing to Planet Money on NPR. I'm doing that just for a short time. They're filling some leadership roles, and I thought it'd be fun to do for the fall. I love podcasting. And I'm doing a little bit of consulting, very few assignments, but on media strategy and on how to structure transformation. So I'm doing a little bit of that. In terms of what I'll do long-term, my book is going to be great, so I'm focused heavily on that, but I do plan to take another content leadership, product leadership role. And I care a lot about news. And in particular, I care about news and information that helps the world become better. I think, we need progress in the world. And I like to push for that in a neutral way, but I like to shine a light on problems. So we'll see, watch my LinkedIn, and I welcome any of you all to please connect with me on LinkedIn. So thank you so much.
So please stay with us. The news industry needs you and more people like you. Thank you so much, Louise. I think you have some other appointments now. So giving over to you, Rodrigo. Thank you very much, Louise.
Thank you very much, Louise, for being part of Digital Media Latam 2021. Maëlys, thank you so much for the moderation. We're gonna briefly show a quick slide on what's coming up next. In 30 minutes, we ask you to join us again for the second session of the program. I'm going to switch to Spanish. Listo, aquí estoy otra vez en español. Vamos a la próxima sesión. Los invitamos a unirse, es en media hora, y vamos a entrar en detalle en varios de los proyectos que está llevando a cabo el Facebook Journalism Project en toda la región. Como les comentaba anteriormente, el Facebook Journalism Project está trabajando con muchos medios, no solo medios, sino también organizaciones de periodismo en América Latina, y vamos a entrar a detalle con varios de estos proyectos para aprender en qué están trabajando exactamente, siempre impulsando, digamos, a los medios en prepararse, adaptarse al cambiante mundo de la era digital y todos los desafíos que eso representa. Así que vamos a tener el caso del Grupo AM de México, vamos a tener también proyectos desde FOPEA en Argentina. Vamos a tener a Vibra de Brasil, el Grupo Bandeirantes, una empresa de televisión. Vamos a tener a alguien del Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism desde Oxford, y también a alguien de Abragi, la organización de periodistas de Brasil, que también tienen muchos proyectos ligados a verificación y combate a la desinformación. Así que esto es en media hora nada más. Los invitamos a unirse para escuchar qué están planeando, qué han hecho estos colegas de la industria, y nos vemos entonces en media hora nada más. Gracias nuevamente a todos nuestros apoyos, y nos vemos en media hora nuevamente por aquí. Muchas gracias.